Well, always, that's the only thing.
The Honorable, the President.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the Supreme Being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth, and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Announcements by the President.
Honourable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator the Honourable Rohan Sinanan, who is out of the country. Honourable Senators, with your leave, we will do the swearing in of the temporary senator a little later in the proceedings.
Urgent questions.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honorable Minister of Health, in light of the treatment of an elderly citizen at the Port of Spain General Hospital and his subsequent death, on the grounds of the facility, what action does the Minister intend to take to ensure that officials involved are held to account?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, first of all, I would like to offer, on behalf of the government and people, our deepest condolences to Mr. Christopher Phillip. He was in my thoughts and prayers last night. Madam President, this question is based on a false premise in that it presupposes guilt. I will now read a preliminary report which I commissioned yesterday, supplied by Dr. Anthony Parkinson. Mr. Phillip was admitted on June 6th, that is Tuesday, June 6th at 10:09. He was 62 years old, not 82 years old. His vitals were taken and he was sent for an X-ray. His main complaint was that he was suffering at home because he had no one to take care of him. He received the X-ray at 2:30 p.m. and the results of the X-rays were told to Mr. Phillip. Mr. Phillip was then medically discharged and instructed not to leave the A&E department because it now became a social case due to his living conditions at home. He complained he had no one at home to take care of him, he had no meals, he was hungry, he had no money for transport. He then disappeared. So that was his first disappearance after being told to wait. At 3 p.m. the same day, he was observed by an MTS guard. He was then taken back into the A&E at 5:16 p.m. on Tuesday again, where his vitals were taken and he was put in a wheelchair to be taken to an examination cubicle. Mr. Phillip then disappeared for the second time in the same day. The assumption was then he discharged himself against medical advice, which as a patient you are entitled to do. On Wednesday, 7th June, yesterday morning, after being treated...
Honourable Minister, your time is up.
Thank you.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, I just would like to ask the Honourable Minister what measures he intends to pursue to avoid such an incident reoccurring in the future.
Minister of Health.
Madam Speaker, Madam President, officials cannot detain someone and constrain someone and treat them against their own wishes, their own consent. The health authorities, the doctors and nurses, treated on the same day. Mr. Philip disappeared on his own volition. There is no guilt, there is no process to be fixed, protocols were followed, and unfortunately, something happened in the intervening period between Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday when he then came back and presented on the lawn. We have no idea what happened in that intervening 12 hours. But all protocols were followed and he received the best of treatment, but he disappeared twice after being told to wait. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Mark?
That's an alien. He disappeared.
No, Senator Mark.
Madam President, may I go on?
Second question?
Yes, I am going on. To the Honorable Minister of Health. Having regard to recent reports that the Scarborough General Hospital is experiencing a shortage of chemical reagents, what urgent measures are being taken to rectify this problem?
Minister of Health?
Thank you, Madam President. The Scarborough General Hospital did in fact have some challenges in the provision of laboratory services. As of today, all routine tests are being provided and they have 2 months' supply on hand, and another shipment is being received tomorrow. Therefore, they will have 3 months' supply. They have now taken the decision, because I was in Tobago on Tuesday, to increase their supply of these reagents from the existing 3 months to 6 months. So there will be no shortages. In view of the current challenges, the following have been done. 1, expedited delivery of reagents, increase inventory levels from 3 months to 6 months, and if the services are not available in-house, these services are outsourced. So no one is disadvantaged or goes without treatment. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator. Next question, Senator Mark.
To the Honorable Minister of National Security. In light of another fatal shooting of a mentally ill person and the admission that officers are not trained to treat with such persons, what is being done to address this situation?
Acting Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Firstly, allow me to convey our heartfelt condolences and sympathies to the family of the deceased person. Officers of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, Madam President, are trained to treat with confrontation by all categories of persons, including mentally ill persons. The Police Service Academy Induction Training Program offers training to recruits with respect to treating with mentally ill persons. In addition, Standing Order number 33 of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service defines who is considered to be a mentally ill individual, as well as a person designated to deal with such individuals. It also provides guidelines for the handling of mentally ill persons who have breached the law and have been detained into police custody, and dictates a process to be adopted by police officers for such. To augment these provisions, a reference guide identifies quick tips on effective communication, de-escalation techniques, and general interaction when treating with mentally ill persons. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Force will continue to train officers. Notwithstanding the training and guidelines provided, in light of the recent reports involving police officers and mentally ill persons, the following is being pursued. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is in the process of reviewing its training programs. I should add, Madam President, that ongoing training continues apace and is applicable across all branches of the service. Thank you very much.
Inspector Kerr, at a news conference yesterday, indicated that police officers are not trained to deal with mentally ill persons.
Minister.
Madam President, I would have responded to a like question in the past. I would repeat, that training continues apace across the service. Thank you very much.
Senator Mark. Next question.
To the Honorable Minister of National Security. In light of recent statements made by the Minister of Agriculture that the Caroni Swamp is a hub for trafficking human beings, drugs, and guns, what immediate measures are being taken to confront this problem?
Acting Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The Ministry of National Security exercises ongoing vigilance and is involved in operational activities countrywide in support of the well-being of citizens and residents of Trinidad and Tobago, and more broadly, to safeguard the national security interests of our country. As required and determined as necessary, operational activities are focused in particular locales. Thank you.
Senator Mark.
Yeah, Madam, can I go to my final?
Sure.
To the Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry, given the announced increase in the price of chicken at poultry depots and the impact this would have on vulnerable citizens, how does the government intend to protect this said group of citizens from the effects of the increase?
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you, Madam President. The Ministry of Trade and Industry notes a statement by the President of the Pluck Shop Association of the increase in the price of chicken at poultry depots, and we have addressed the matter. The government recognizes that chicken, like all agricultural products, are subject to local market conditions and international conditions vis-à-vis a price of inputs. Based on the findings of the Consumer Affairs Division, the announced price increase by the industry is in effect, we believe, a normal fluctuation in prices. For instance, for the first quarter of 2017, chicken prices were generally lower due to seasonal factors. On average, consumers paid $5.70 per pound over the period January to March 2017. For instance, if I go back to 2010.
Minister. Honourable Senators, the time for urgent questions has expired. Is it the wish that we will continue? Yes.
Madam President, if I should make an intervention here. When the standing orders were changed for urgent questions, it was urgent matters in the society that may have occurred prior to filing questions on notice. I mean, 6 questions obviously is an overkill. Okay, so what I will do, I will allow this 5th question into its finality, and we wouldn't want to extend the time.
We'll decline and we'll have a discussion with you on this matter. Thank you.
Members, honourable senators, at this stage, I will revert to that, the order paper, and we will now do the swearing in of the temporary senator. Honourable senators, I have received the following correspondence from His Excellency the President Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTTSC. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago by His Excellency Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTTSC, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Ms. Alicia Romano, whereas Senator Ruhan Sinanan is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Alicia Romano, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 8th of June 2017 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator Sinanan. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President St. Anne's this 8th day of June 2017. Honourable Senators, a senator is required to take the oath.
I, Alicia Romano, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Public business, government business, bills second reading.
Honourable Senators, the debate on the second reading of the following bill, which was in progress when the Senate adjourned on Tuesday, March 21st, 2017, will be resumed. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Offences Against the Person Act, Chapter 1108, and the Criminal Procedure Act, Chapter 1202, and for related matters. Honourable Senators, 14 senators have spoken already on this bill, including the Honourable Attorney General, who was the mover of the motion. Senator Small.
Good afternoon, everyone. Madam President, it is with great humility that I acknowledge your graciousness in allowing me to speak this afternoon on the Miscellaneous Provisions Trial by Jury Alone Bill 2017, which is an act to amend the Offences Against the Person Act, Chapter 1108, and the Criminal Procedure Act, Chapter 1202. Madam President, we are here to look at this piece of legislation, which, when I peruse the agenda circulated by the government, it forms part of a package to try to treat with what everyone understands as some of the ills of the existing criminal justice system. So while this is a bill that sits by itself today, it forms part of a framework of legislation to try to improve the current system. And I'm fully supportive of that. I think that the fact that we in Trinidad and Tobago, we continue to talk about challenges, but recognizing that challenges require concerted effort and concerted action and some planning. So when I looked at this particular piece of legislation, Madam President, I think that this is something that the government should be congratulated for. I think that this is a move in the right direction. I'm always one to say that no piece of legislation will ever be perfect. I think what is being proposed in this bill provides an option for persons. It does not in any way, in my respectful view, challenge or take away anyone's existing rights to a jury trial by a jury. All, in my respectful view, this piece of legislation does. It provides an opportunity for someone to have an additional option. And if I'm in a place someone is leaving me what exists and giving me an additional option, I don't really see how there could be any difficulty with that. As with any system, nothing will always be perfect. The existing system has significant challenges. And I will outline some of those things because I think everyone probably has a view that trial by jury is perfect. And I would like to say that it's not. It has its imperfections. And while I'm sure trial by judge alone has its imperfections, it also has its good points. So I will try to present a balanced argument from my view. I'll make it clear right now, Madam President, this is something I support. I believe that this is something that, while it may not fix the backlog of cases within the system, we can't sit and say, well, if it doesn't fix the backlog, well, it's not going to work. we have to start a plan for the future. And I think this is part of a system of planning for the future, and it's something that I believe is the way we should go. And it should really be a methodology that's applied across the board to other endeavors. So, Madam President, if you'll permit me, after those couple of opening remarks, I just wanted to build my argument or build my contribution around helping us outlining what my research showed about the origins of trial by jury. The origins of trial by jury, where the swearing of 12 men to account for the facts, goes back way past the Norman conquest of 1066. The petty jury, as it was called, made its first proper appearance in the 12th century. And it became more prominent due to the fact that the church disallowed the practice of the 12 of water and fire ordeals. Madam President, given the basic nature of many persons performing wrongful acts to lie when challenged, there had to be some basis upon which to adjudicate guilt or innocence. Prior to trial by jury, there was something called trial by ordeal. There's the ordeal of water, which was to essentially take someone, cast the suspected person into a pond of water, and if without any action on their part, they floated to the surface, they were deemed innocent. And if they sank, they were deemed guilty. There was a trial by what is called hot iron. The person would be required to pick up a measure of iron weighing 1 pound after it had been heated in a fire. And he would have to carry it 9 feet, measured in the steps of his own feet. And if he was able to, he had to carry it 9 feet. And after 3 days, if the wound suffered in his hands became infected, then he was found guilty. And if it wasn't infected, he or she would be said to be innocent. And finally, there was something called trial by hot water, where they would heat a cauldron. And again, you would have to dip your arm into a cauldron of boiling water up to your elbow. And then again, they would bind the wound. And if after 3 days it wasn't infected, you would be found not guilty. So the trial by jury didn't just appear. There were things going on before that. So that these ancient modes of trying to adjudicate guilt or innocence, of course, are inadequate for a modern, complex society in which we operate today. However, I'd like to posit that given some of the heinous crimes that are happening in the world now, some of these options should really be back on the table because people are doing some crazy things. Madam President, in 12th century England, juries were a tool for the king to determine whether or not persons were guilty or innocent. And if you'd permit me, Madam President, authors William Forsythe and Appleton Morgan in their 1875 book, Trial by Jury, call attention to conflicting theories on the origin of the jury system. And I quote, they contend that jury does not owe its existence to any preconceived idea of jurisprudence, but gradually grew out of modes of trial in use amongst the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans, some of which I've just described. So, Madam President, trial by jury has traditionally been seen as the cornerstone of democracy and the rule of law. This led Lord Devlin to dramatically comment in 1956 that trial by jury, and I quote, is the lamp which shows that freedom lives. Close quotation. We've inherited the system, Madam President, from our former colonial masters, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just part of our history. Madam President, the bill before us provides the options for an accused person to opt for a trial with a judge only. I have no challenge with this, Madam President, in essence. The question may arise as to what process or pressure will be brought to bear to get this outcome. For instance, it may not be appropriate or correct for someone to choose this option where the overriding factor or consideration in their mind is the likelihood of being incarcerated for years awaiting trial. Accused persons may find themselves making a life-altering decision, but however, they should be able to do so in a very considered and what I would say an advised and pressure-free manner. So, Madam President, what are the benefits of a trial by judge alone? I would go through a couple of them. When a judge delivers a verdict, they generally have to give reasons for their decision. As a judge can't sit and give a decision and say, well, I support this party, or I support having this person be innocent. A judge giving a verdict has to provide his reasons in writing, usually quite voluminous. The process of a trial by jury means that the jury deliberations are secret, and they do not have to provide any reasons for making their decision. So that's a fundamental difference. So if a judge makes a decision, he has to put it in writing. A jury deliberates and provides there, is guilty or not guilty. That's it. There's no reasoning provided by the jury. Another issue, Madam President, knowing the reasons why a judge decided on a guilty verdict makes it easier for a defendant to appeal and makes the process more transparent. It can help also demonstrate that there was no bias or at play, and that the decision made was made solely on the basis of the objective analysis of the evidence presented. With jury deliberations being secret, Madam President, there's really no way to know whether their decision was made from a purely legal basis or for other reasons. Madam President, as a typical jury is made up of members of the public, mostly or almost totally with little or no legal knowledge, it can be difficult for them to understand the complexities of challenging criminal matters. Judges, on the other hand, have legal training and experience and are able to analyze evidence, know what to give priority to, and assess the credibility of witnesses. Although jurors in jury trials are advised to leave their prejudices out of the trial, it is difficult to know the extent to which they are actually able to do this. In particular, when you're dealing with complex issues, expert evidence in many times is complex for a judge, let alone for a jury, especially when there's a lot of scientific or forensic materials to consider. Applies issues where there may be issues of sophisticated accounting or market transactions. Madam President, a key issue here, when I thought about this entire process, is that fewer and fewer people actually want to serve on a jury, and many have worked out how to avoid the task. I can give you personal experience of me. I have served jury service, and after that first experience, I didn't want to do it again. And I didn't want to do it again. I'm not going to lie. So that it's not a fun experience. I've served on a jury, and it wasn't something that I wanted to repeat. And while I understand it's my civic duty, at the time when it came to me, you did what you could do to find a reason to not attend. And that's just what it is. Madam President, the process of a trial by jury is, of course, longer and more procedurally complex than when a trial is heard by judge alone, and, of course, more expensive by extension. Madam President, the glaring reality is that this kind of confected environment in which jurors are expected to operate may not necessarily be the most functional one. The capacity to closet jurors away from the real world of instant information and swollen prejudice perhaps is gone forever. The world in which we operate now, the technology that's available in these devices, I can sit here and get information from anyone all around the world in real time. You know, you closet a jury, and the extent to which you can protect or block them out from what is going on in the world, it's an interesting concept. The practicality or the ability to really deliver on that is questionable. So, Madam President, what are the benefits of a jury trial? Advocates of jury trials generally see the benefits of there's a benefit in having a group of persons making a decision rather than putting the responsibility into the hands of a single person. So I understand that logic. It's if you're thinking that if this one person is somehow infected with a particular view, whether you know or not, having more persons contributing to the decision would allow for perhaps some tempering of that view. So that this essentially could reduce the likelihood that a single person's bias or prejudices could influence the outcome of a verdict. Although judges are meant to be impartial and unbiased, if they do have a personal bias against a defendant, it may mean that they don't give a balanced, a fair verdict. It is also believed by some of the researchers in the area that a trial by jury can more accurately reflect the views of the community and society, as the jury is taken from a sample of members that cut across the entire society. It could be argued that a single judge may be out of touch with the views of the society, and their decision may not reflect the values of the community that they serve as a whole. Another argument to support jury trials is that juries perform a valuable role in connecting the community with criminal justice and in bringing into the process the community's values and standards. There's also the consideration of cases where defendants think that saturation via adverse media coverage will make it impossible for them to get a fair trial before a jury. So, Madam President, what I've tried to do is to outline that, yes, there's positives for having a trial by jury. And yes, there's positive for having a trial by judge alone. This bill provides for both. So I struggle to try to say why this should not be allowed. Because on every system, just as there's positive, there's not so positives. That's just the nature of the world. I don't think there's anything that's completely all positive and it's all good and wonderful. Madam President, I want to quote in Australia, Queen's Counsel M.J. McClusker had an argument articulated in a celebrated paper delivered in 2009 entitled Bad Press. Does the jury deserve it? He delivered this at the 36th Australian Legal Convention on 18 September 2009. And I want to quote. His argument was that in an era where there's a demand for what is popularly called transparency, the deliberations of juries and the reasons for their verdict are shrouded in total secrecy. Not only do juries not give reasons, but they're not permitted to do so. Hence, to appeal against a jury's verdict tends to be very difficult. The only way of achieving transparency is for all trials to be by judge alone, possibly sitting with an assessor or assessors to assist the judge in cases which may involve complex issues of a scientific or commercial nature, or perhaps by 3 judges, each writing without conferral separate decisions. Close quotations. Madam President, it is in fact arguable that one is more likely to obtain the essential truth about a matter via the McClusker-type model that I've just outlined than through a traditional jury process. A judge is trained to analyze evidence, to give proper weight to some evidence over other evidence, and to assess witnesses, the veracity of the witnesses, and to probe the arguments put by counsel, and is less likely to be swayed by emotive rhetoric or other histrionics of colorful advocates. If we step back and examine many pieces of legislation that have been brought here in the past period that I've been here, Madam President, such as the Procurement Act, important decision makers have to provide reviewable reasons for their decisions. But when it comes to citizens' liberty, reasons are not required. Judges are accountable, jurors are not. Juries are an article of faith for the criminal defense system, and it's often trotted out like a mantra. Interestingly, in Australia, the Australia Bureau of Crime Statistics has figures that show that judge-alone trials result in higher rates of acquittal than jury trials. In the data presented for the period when I went to their website, they had data up until 2011. It showed that defendants were acquitted 55% of the time in judge-alone trials, as compared to 29% by jury trials. So that time-worn practitioners say this is because judges are busy people, and to convict someone requires more detailed and carefully written reasons than if they are acquitted. There's also, Madam President, very real likelihood that judges would not be as easily swayed by juries by the wily exhortations of the skillful advocate. Madam President, perhaps as our justice system evolves, we could examine other configurations, such as multiple trial juries, trial judges sitting in panels, or lay assessors, deliberating alongside judges. These are some of the ways and some of the tools that have been applied in more modern democracies that have had long experience with this. Madam President, there has been a lot of faith placed in the trial by jury system in Trinidad and Tobago by the legal profession, and by persons in academia and by the members of the general public. But, Madam President, I strongly believe, this should not prevent a more fulsome discussion in the community and in the legal policy-making arena about whether or not judges hearing the evidence and deliberating on criminal charges is a more preferable route to follow if we want to ensure greater transparency in the justice system. That is the essence of the debate today. On balance, Madam President, anyone who's been following my contribution in the short period that I have been here in the Senate would note that one of my clarion calls has been for transparency in all that occurs. I think that everyone knows that I strive to understand systems. I want to see and understand a system. But for me to understand how it works, I need transparency. When it's all shrouded in secrecy, it's difficult to make an intelligent call. Perhaps, Madam President, this well-intentioned bill will allow some accused persons to take the view that a judge-only trial, at the very least, gives them some deep-stated insight into the reasons for any judgment, whether it's positive or negative on their behalf. Professor Jody O'Leary of Bond University in Australia, in a 2011 article entitled 12 Angry Peers or One Angry Judge, an analysis of judge-alone trials in Australia. Based on his studies, he says that he concluded that the experiences have, and I quote, reignited the debate as to the value of jury trials as opposed to decisions made by the professional judiciary. He goes on to state that there's still little consensus in the Australian judiciary or the legislature as to whether the accused choice is to be preferred or whether there's a presumption of a jury trial due to the community's interests. Close quotation. Madam President, that is where we are today. We seem to not have consensus on whether or not there should be a widening of the scope of the existing system to allow persons the option to choose a trial by judge alone. I cannot see any significant mischief in that. There's going to be some administrative issues inside of it to support someone wishing to go that route, but I can't see you're an accused person. The current system allows you to have trial by jury. The new provision gives you the option to have trial by judge. You can still have a trial by jury, so that you're not negatively affected. So I understand that. I have reviewed the bill, and I think there's some issues in there, but I don't see anything there that should stop us from moving forward. I strongly support the move. Madam President, I also have a view, because we have, as a country, to make decisions about whether to entrench the status quo or to make a modification to the existing system. Throughout my short time here in the Senate, Madam President, people's entities, and certainly when I listen to some, I am firmly on the side of trying to make modification and improvements going forward. And it's not that the current system is bad, there's always room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. If we think that a system is perfect, then we need to check the extent to which our brain cells are functioning. No system is perfect. It has flaws. But this bill allows for providing accused persons or persons before the courts having the option to decide that they want to have their matter treated by a judge alone. I do not see the mischief in that. To be clear, Madam President, the bill before us does not discard jury trials. And I always tend to lean towards ways of improving or optimizing systems. Insofar as such changes bring a broader or more noble or additional benefits to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. It is my considered and respectful view that this bill does just that. Madam President, as I begin to wind up my short contribution, because I didn't think that this matter warranted, from my own view, a long contribution. I think that the matter is, from where I sit, respectfully, well considered. I think that, again, the Attorney General and the team who have packaged this as part of a whole system of legislation. I have looked at the government's legislative agenda, and I have seen some additional pieces that are going to try to plug some of the gaps within the existing judicial system. It is part of a package of legislation to try to improve the system. I cannot respectfully, Madam President, resist that. I think that that is something we should be supporting and moving forward with. We have challenges in the system. The only way to fix it is to say, okay, let's see how we can, and there's no way you can change the system from one system to a new system overnight. You go in stages. And I think this is the approach that has been adopted by the government. And certainly with regards to this bill, I understand, and I even have a couple of issues inside of there, but I think those are administrative things about making sure that persons who want to choose trial by judge have proper someone guiding them, they have proper or independent persons to guide them in terms of making that option, and helping them understand what it really means. But I don't see that as something that should prevent me from thinking through and saying, what is the overall good? Is this for the overall good of Trinidad and Tobago or not? Madam President, I tend to support the former view. I believe this is for the better good of Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam President, as is my want, having you given me the wonderful opportunity to speak, I wish to thank you very much for bearing with me through my contribution. Thank you very much.
Minister of Labour and Small.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to join in this debate today. Madam President, this Senate treats with the amendment of both the Offences Against the Person Act, Chapter 1108, and the Criminal Procedures Act, Chapter 1202, and for related matters. Madam President, through my contribution here, I intend to show the following. One, the jury causes a great waste of time. Two, the jury is often said incompetent to determine many of the complex issues before it. Three, the jury is swayed by emotional appeal. Four, the jury cannot in many instances understand complicated transaction or the various legal terminologies used and involved in many cases. 5, juries are costly. 6, juries are tedious. 7, juries favor the accused. And 8, 20th century challenges to jury trial, particularly the influence of modern technology. Madam President, while this bill is a fairly straightforward one, it is a very important piece of legislation and must not be treated in any trivial manner, as this is not the time for political games or any other games. Madam President, Clause 3 of the bill seeks to amend the Offences Against the Person Act to accommodate trial by judge without a jury, with Clause 4 of the bill seeking the amendment of the Criminal Procedures Act to give an accused person. Madam President, and I think that is what has escaped a lot of my colleagues through the various contributions of many of them. It gives the accused an option. It does not really remove the option of trial by jury. Madam President, permit me to reiterate the point that this bill presents an option to accused persons. Its aim is not to abolish trial by jury, but to merely add another option for the accused and as part of the larger criminal justice system in this country. So, Madam President, the obvious question is, what is wrong in presenting more options to an accused person? Absolutely nothing is wrong. Madam President, we are living in a time that is so pervasive. When crime is so pervasive, I dare say that even if one had their head buried in the sand, one would know that we in this society, we have a very serious problem with crime in this country and various forms of criminality among persons in the society. Madam President, the option that this bill presents may, in the years to come, redound to the benefit of the citizens of this country, who we, all of us in here, Madam President, even my colleagues who would have spoken against this piece of legislation would end up serving them and their families in time to come. Madam President, there has been much representation by my colleagues on the other side and others that this bill attacks a constitutional right to a trial by jury. Madam President, I beg to differ with that school of thought. I have looked at the Constitution of this country, and I have noted that there is a constitutional right to a public and fair trial before an independent and impartial tribunal at Section 5F. So then, Madam President, is trial by jury the only manner in which a fair trial before an independent and impartial tribunal can be afforded to the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago? We, this government, say that the right of a citizen to a fair trial before an independent and impartial tribunal can be afforded to the citizens of this country is actually enhanced by the provision of an option in this piece of legislation, Madam President. And I find myself having to say, I think the third time now, this bill does not serve to replace trial by a jury with a trial by a judge. Instead, it provides an option to the accused person. How then is providing an option to an accused person determined as being unfair? How does one, in an attempt to enhance justice in this country, how can that be considered to be wrong or unfair? Madam President, it takes little attention to notice that as a society, we are tackling a very grave crime situation in this country, and crime affects us all. Because when we leave here, we go back to our various homes in various communities, so it impacts on us. Madam President, this government, our government, is about taking action and not looking back and mourning lost opportunities. We are looking ahead and the challenges that lie ahead, and how do we combat these challenges? Madam President, this government would not be begging citizens' pardon because we failed in our duty when we had the opportunity to act. Madam President, in doing what is needed to address the crime situation, our government has set out a package of legislation to address the crime situation, and this bill forms part of that package. And I dare say, Madam President, despite what the naysayers have said and would continue to say in the future, I want to commend our Attorney General for doing a fine job in bringing this piece of legislation to this House. He works very hard, and we are seeing the benefit of his hard work. Well done, Mr. Attorney General. Madam President, trial by jury is a feature of our criminal justice system, but it is an old construct, we will all agree, having evolved over centuries as part of the English common law system. I was particularly interested in my colleague, Senator Small, in some of the examples he cited. I mean, I am quite sure our collective blood crawled at having one's hand immersed in boiling water and all other such forms of barbaric kind of testing as was done so many years ago. I am quite happy that I was born when I did. So, Madam President, as outlined by the Honorable Attorney General in his contribution to the debate on this bill on March 14, we are now 173 years into the utilization of trial by jury system. And therefore, self-reflection is appropriate and healthy at this point in time. But action is fundamental to bring about change. And Madam President, we are a fundamentally different society today from over a century ago. For our laws and systems to be effective, we must modernize our various pieces of archaic law, Madam President, because we are an evolving society becoming more and more modernized. And if we don't keep in tune with the times, Madam President, I shudder to think the outcome. Madam President, a jury refers, at least in the common law tradition to which we belong, to a body of ordinary persons who are selected from a larger number summoned by the state. And I say summoned, and I know I recall my colleague, Senator Small, sharing with us that he would have served as a juror and did not have the enthusiasm to do so. Subsequently, a feeling, an emotion that is shared by quite a substantial amount of citizens of this country. Madam President, jury trial is one manner of determining the guilt or innocence of a person accused of an offense. It is reputed to have a lengthy lineage, and its history precedes the European rediscovery. Well, let me not use that word rediscovery, because Christopher Columbus, I hold a very strong view, never discovered us. We were always here. He just happened to see us when he came here, but we were always here. It is sufficient to say, Madam President, that it is a function of the jury to find the facts in a given case, and the function of a judge is to interpret the law relative to those facts. So that when, Madam President, it has been convincingly pointed out that a trial by jury usually requires from 2 to 3 times the amount of time required when the jury trial is waived and the case is tried by a judge. Madam President, from my understanding, trial by jury causes considerable delay, and the courts get so far behind trying ordinary cases that it becomes impossible to obtain justice in a given case within a reasonable time. Madam President, we are all familiar, you yourself, your profession as a lawyer, would be very much aware of the statement, justice delayed is justice denied, especially when an accused person's freedom is restricted due to an ongoing criminal matter. Madam President, at the 2016 opening of the law term, the Chief Justice of this country made a clarion call for the abolition of the jury system, citing undue delay as one of the 2 primary reasons for his position. He drew our attention to the fact that about 15 to 20% of sitting time is lost owing to jury management issues such as illness, exams, take note, Senator Small, family funerals, lateness, and many other forms of inconveniences. But Madam President, the reality is, as much for some, the ability to serve as a juror is viewed as a privilege, there are many, many persons who simply do not wish to be jurors, and therefore they are unwilling to serve. And I recall several experiences, Madam President, that drew the humor out of it. Even some of my own relatives trying to escape the jury experience. Madam President, in small societies like Trinidad and Tobago, individuals are sometimes summoned for jury service several times, not once, not twice, not 3 times, several times. And some have come to loathe the imposed obligation, as well as being sequestered or separated from the rest of the population, especially their families, Madam President. Madam President, in several Caribbean cases, jurors are known to have asserted that they do not like to judge other people. The Bible tells us, those of us who have the Christian belief, do not judge if you don't want to be judged, or that they do not understand the instructions given to them. There is also the questionable practice of praying of tales, Madam President. That is when, in a situation where there are insufficient jurors, the marshal is commanded by the court to bring any duly qualified person he can find to serve in order to complete the panel of jurors. I'm coming to that. Madam, you're so correct. Madam President, I don't know if we can all recall, but this occurred in the case of Dolcedi, where several of the original jurors were challenged for cause, and then the marshal's search for jurors was the subject of much national media coverage. Madam President, admittedly, there are other reasons for the long delays in the criminal justice system in this country, including a lack of resources, frequent adjournments, or just too many accused, with the system bursting at the seams as a result. Madam President, because of other pieces of legislation may have a greater positive impact on the criminal justice system than this bill, should we then proceed to ignore this bill? Should we lose an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of the citizens of this country, even though some of them may end up being accused? Madam President, this government is not about shirking our responsibilities. It's not about shirking our duties towards the citizens of this country. And we will continue to make every effort to improve the quality of life for the citizens of our beloved Twin Island state. Madam President, there's also an economic cost to trial by jury. Although the precise amount of this cost remain unquantified in Caribbean jurisdictions, the cost includes the money expended by the state to hold the trial, the personal economic costs suffered by jurors hearing the matters, particularly where those jurors are self-employed, so they have to leave their businesses and attend court, thereby losing several days of earning capacity. And we all know, Madam President, that the compensation ordered by the state for jury duty does not come close to matching the actual economic loss suffered by the individual juror. So then, Madam President, we cannot ignore this fundamental and important factor, the impact it has on a self-employed earning capacity. My colleagues on the other side, Madam President, have spent a tremendous amount of time telling us that trial by jury does not cost that much. But have they factored in the time spent and placed a value on such time? We are all very much aware, Madam President, that time means money. And we all know that we have very precious little money these days to go around. But despite the costs, we are not saying do away with trial by jury in its entirety in one fell swoop. what we are actually saying, let there be another option. And that option is going to save us time and money, Madam President. Jurors are men and women taken from everyday life, unfamiliar with courtroom procedures and courtroom language, as any attorney at law who practices at the courts of this land. These jurors can be easily misled. They can be easily misled by the language used, by the judge's instructions, and they may give inadvertent, unfair, or prejudiced decisions. Madam President, as my learned colleagues in this House have demonstrated, lawyers are equipped with very agile and enticing arguments and personalities, and the reality is that the jury is likely to become intrigued by the two contesting lawyers. I mean, we have eminent senior counsel with us for whom we have great respect and whose point of view we welcome and we pay attention to. I would love to see senior counsel in action in the court. I'm quite sure she will do an excellent job in swaying whomever it is to her point of view. But I digress too much, Madam President. Madam President, in such a situation, it is very likely that jurors are likely to decide the case according to what they think of the lawyers rather than what they think of the rights of the parties involved. Madam President, another charge made against a jury is that they cannot understand the complicated transactions or the terminology involved in many cases they are asked to decide. A major problem, Madam President, is a disadvantage of the jury system is compounded by the fact that most professionals are exempt from jury service. Where an accused person opts for a trial by judge alone, the matter is heard by someone who is an expert in law. In the trial of Vicky Price in the UK on allegations of perverting the course of justice, the jury failed to reach a verdict and was discharged. The judge claimed the jurors had posed 10 questions to him, which suggested that there was a fundamental deficit in understanding the trial process. Among the questions, Madam President, were whether the jury could make their decision on the basis of facts for which there was no evidence, and what was meant by reasonable doubt. It may be too much to ask laypersons to determine issues of fact when the facts themselves are complicated and the evidence complex. So therefore, Madam President, trial by a judge is speedier, and the judge, who is an expert in law, has been trained to analyze the facts and can be very objective in assessing what really is the truth in the matter here. As I said earlier, Madam President, our world has changed fundamentally, and with the increasing length and complexity of jury cases, this has led to concern about the continued viability of the system. Madam President, we live in a world of increasing terrorism and highly organized crimes, and therefore we must consider the harm of jury intimidation. I mean, Madam President, we have read in the newspapers jurors being killed to prevent them from giving evidence in the court of law. Madam President, it is well known that juries do not provide reasons for their verdicts. Therefore, it is impossible to review the path that the jury took in finding facts and whether it correctly applied the law to the facts presented. As such, Madam President, the option of trial by judge as presented in this bill makes the system more transparent, and all parties have the benefit of a judge giving a written decision outlining his or her reasons for his or her decisions. Madam President, we cannot ignore the reality that jury service may also be a very stressful experience with lingering consequences, depending on the length and nature of the trial in question and the personality of the juror involved. Jurors who are deliberated on trials where detailed descriptions of gruesome crimes were given from anxiety and nightmares simply because of what had been seen or what had been heard. Madam President, in winding down, I'm going to look at some of the 20th century challenges to trial by jury. Madam President, in the inaugural Distinguished Jurist Lecture delivered in 2011, Sir Sridhar Ramphal quite aptly called this period of our history, and I quote, an age of rapid and often bewildering transition, close quotation. Each day we encounter seemingly endless technological inventions and improvements aimed at making our collective lives easier, Madam President. Information and ideas are more accessible and communication more convenient. The rapid rate at which technology continues to evolve lead to a corresponding continuous evolution in societal norms and behaviors, and therefore those are issues to be considered very seriously. Madam President, the tentacles of technology threatens to transform what we regard as trial by jury into trial by Google, a term borrowed from a speech given by the then English Attorney General, the Right Honorable Dominic Grieve, QC MP, in a lecture delivered at the University of Kent in 2013. Trial by Google or Twitter or Tumblr or Facebook or Wikipedia, to say nothing of YouTube, encapsulates the influence that the internet may have on jurors who either inadvertently encounter material or deliberately attempt to research the case on which they sit. Madam President, it therefore has the potential to become a serious problem that challenges our own conception of what really is a fair trial. The dangers which our criminal justice system is likely to face due to the increasing importance of technology in our lives have already become an issue, albeit in our other jurisdictions. Yes, I would agree. But Madam President, the Queen versus Barry Medlock was one of the many criminal trials that took place in England in 2011. It was one of the few criminal trials that occurred by jury that year. Medlock was charged, along with two co-defendants, with causing grievous bodily harm. One of the jurors in his trial at the Luton County Court was a former university lecturer in psychology, 34-year-old Theodora Dallas. Madam President, perhaps because she was intent on taking her civic duties seriously, or perhaps because she was simply distracted when the judge gave his directions, Ms. Dallas, despite repeated warnings from the court, decided to research certain terms she heard being used on her own. She used Google to search for grievous bodily harm, and another search term, Luton, the name of the area where the trial was occurring. Madam President, through this search, Ms. Dallas discovered that the accused had a prior charge of rape but was acquitted. This information had no bearing on the trial and was not disclosed. However, Ms. Dallas shared the information with her fellow jurors, and this came to the attention of the court. A mistrial was then ordered, and Ms. Dallas was sentenced to 6 months in prison for contempt of court. Madam President, juror misconduct of the type in which Ms. Dallas engaged makes a mockery of the rules of evidence and taints the evidence on which the jury chooses to rely when arriving at a verdict. This case is not an anomaly, but is one of a number of cases occurring within the last 5 years where the use of the internet search engine or social media platform by a juror has either led to the removal of a juror, halted a jury trial in the midst of proceedings, or caused a conviction to be set aside, Madam President. Jurors have also misused Facebook and Twitter to the detriment of the right to a fair trial. Madam President, in another case, a multi-million-pound drug trial that occurred in August 2010, a British juror not only friended on Facebook a defendant with whom she allegedly felt a certain empathy, but proceeded to have online discussions with the defendant about the charge against her. The juror's action caused the complex 10-week trial that was on its third attempt and involved multiple charges and multiple defendants, and that was nearing its conclusion to be abruptly aborted. Both the juror and defendant in question were found guilty of contempt, with the juror being sentenced to 8 months in prison, Madam President. Madam President, another Facebook user posted details about the trial in which she was acting as a juror and proceeded to hold a poll among her friends simply because she was not sure which way to vote during oncoming deliberation. So she decided to rely on her friends. Although such behavior has not yet been reported in our jurisdictions, Madam President, with the increasing access of our citizens to the internet and the tantalizing services it offers, these cases foreshadow what is soon likely to come. Such behavior by jurors, which is often contrary to the clear and specific instructions of the judge, is rather worrying. It can only lead to the wastage of governmental resources and precious judicial time, while exacerbating systemic delays that already exist in our system. Madam President, it also seriously threatens the right to a fair trial of an accused person. Madam President, there is another, perhaps less evident risk posed by technological innovation that does not bode well for jury trials of the future should they continue in the same manner in which they do today. In part, possibly because of technological innovations, we have now a large and growing body of citizens with ever-shortening attention spans, Madam President, who find it difficult to sit down and listen as patiently as you do here, Madam President, when you preside in the august chair in which you sit. Arguably, due to the world that we now live in. But the dangers of this difficulty, Madam President, in sitting and listening can be especially dangerous in the case of jurors whose function is to do just that. Sit and listen to the facts. Madam President, in closing, I believe that as a government and as a parliament, we have a responsibility to the citizens of this country, and therefore we must act in their best interests when we address matters at this level. At times, the matters engage our attention will require fundamental changes, and I urge all of us in this chamber not to be afraid of change, but to embrace it as it is only one of the two constants in life: change and death. In keeping with this guiding belief, Madam President, I am grateful for the opportunity to have participated in the debate on this bill, for the opportunity to reiterate the dedication of this government to the citizens of this country, but more so, Madam President, having emerged from the women's movement in this country, my experiences in the women's movement, I am particularly pleased with the Attorney General for the enlightened approach she took in recognizing the existence of postpartum depression. And as a mother myself, and as a grandmother, and knowing and understanding that some women do go through postpartum depression. And it is highlighted, provision is made for such a situation, Madam President, and I want to commend the Attorney General. Madam President, the presentation of this bill demonstrates this government's resolve to fulfill our commitments to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, our commitment to making the lives of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago a better one. I thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to have so participated.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, I want to begin by saying that as lawmakers, our first duty and the responsibility is to protect, defend, and safeguard the rights and interests of the majority against the terror, aggression, and tyranny of the minority, and especially corrupt governments wherever they may exist. Fortunately for us, in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam President, we do have a constitution which is the supreme law of the land and trumps the legislature when legislation is passed that seeks to deny the rights of the citizens to justice and fair play. Madam President, I want to indicate that many of my colleagues who have spoken today, both Senator Small and the last speaker, and also Senator Toppin, who the Honorable Senator Jennifer Baptiste-Primus, and my good friend Senator Coppin, they all made statements to the effect that this bill that we are debating seeks to offer options to the citizenry and not to take away any options. And who can argue against that? They advance their different points of view. Madam President, I will debunk completely those ill-conceived thoughts that have emanated from the lips of our colleagues, and to demonstrate during my contribution where the government has in fact brought changes to both pieces of legislation, particularly the criminal procedure legislation, where they are removing trial by jury and replacing it by judge-alone trials. Madam President, it is clear that many of us could become distracted by the smooth talking Attorney General, whose utterances, if not carefully analyzed, dissected, and critically disaggregated, can easily mislead the uninitiated and innocent. But, Madam President, I want to say that the right, or the attempt, I should say, to remove a right, and I disagree with my honorable friend, who says that trial by jury, Madam President, is not a right. It is a right. It is a constitutional expectation, Madam President. And that matter, if listen, then we will take it where it has to be addressed and adjudicated. I am saying, Madam President, and I will argue in my submission, that there is a constitutional, legitimate expectation in the Constitution, in the law of this country, that says that citizens have a right to a fair trial and a right to be tried by their peers, which is trial by jury. Madam President, I want to indicate that I would not like Trinidad and Tobago to join the very limited group of countries that have introduced this particular method of determining guilt or innocence. I am not going to join South Africa. I am not going to join India, Singapore. I am not going to join Papua New Guinea, Russia, Western Australia, Belize, Pakistan, or Bangladesh. I prefer to stay with the United States, and I prefer to stay with the United Kingdom, with the exception of jury tampering and serious cases of fraud. That is the only time they have introduced trial by judge alone. Everything else is trial by jury. So, Madam President, I do not want to be part of those countries. And we should never become and seek to become part of those countries. Madam President, may I remind you, it was a judge-alone trial that placed in the cells of Robben Island in South Africa the iconic Nelson Mandela. It was under the racist apartheid regime that established in '69, Madam President, trial by judge alone for racist reasons. They used a judge alone in '64 to convict Nelson Mandela and issued a life sentence to Nelson Mandela. Judge alone. Judge alone, Madam President. We don't want to be part of that experience, Madam President. And we are hearing all kinds of arguments, Madam President, as to why the jury system is so negative, and jurors are this and jurors are that. In fact, it was the Chief Justice himself who said that they are functionally illiterate. That is the contempt in our country that we have for the ordinary working people of this land. And then you have the Honorable Baptiste-Primus, Senator, saying, Baptiste-Primus, so long. Madam President, telling us that juries favor accused. I've never heard that in my life. Where's the evidence? You make statements, Madam President, whimsically, capriciously, openly, without any evidential basis, and say jurors favor the accused. Where's the evidence for that? You can't make these kinds of statements in order to raise your arguments in favor of judge alone, trials by judge alone. You must have evidential material information to support that. I have said to you, Madam President, may I address you, please? Because I know the honorable member is trying to distract me. So, Madam President, judges are unavoidably subjective, and their reality is socially constructed. So I am not in no favor of no judge alone by trial. Not in Trinidad and Tobago, ever. We are not in favor of that. This is an evil piece of legislation that we are dealing with here today. And it is being piloted by an administration that is dangerous and deceptive. And Madam President, this judge alone by trial, if you do not carefully analyze this, This could be used as a weapon by an administration that is so insecure that they may use this to eliminate who they perceive as their political enemies in this country. Madam President, I want to make it very clear. There's no destruction of public relations gambit. This is a well thought out, well calculated, and diabolically designed plan to silence government's critics. That is the start, Madam President, of the thin edge of the wedge.
Senator Mark.
Madam President.
Senator Mark, please. Could you just, some of the language that you're using is getting a little intemperate, so I would ask you to please just be aware of that as you proceed.
So, Madam President,
46.6 in particular, I know that you've risen on that, but it's, in my view, I'm asking you to consider that it's gone beyond the course in the imputations.
Senator Mark, continue. Attorney General have already spoken to Senator Mark.
Madam President, we are aghast by the irrational emotionalism coming from many who ought to know better. It is clear, Madam President, from the references made by the Attorney General, by some of our colleagues here, that they are in complete support, and that is their right. They made extensive reference to the Chief Justice, who they support, and who apparently, Madam President, supports the abolition of the jury system. No, I'm saying that is
I know what you're saying, Senator Mark. I am listening. Just put what you're saying differently. Any reference to the Chief Justice in the way I just heard it, I'm asking that we stay clear of that in our presentations. Continue, Senator.
Madam President, there are people in this Senate who said, and it's on record, I have it in the Hansard, where the Attorney General quoted extensively from the address of the Chief Justice, in which the Chief Justice of this country said he is in favor of the abolition of the jury system. He also said that that is not a right. I am disputing that, and I'm saying I do not support that. And I am responding to what the Attorney General has said. Madam President, that is what I'm doing. No, listen, don't disturb me, please.
Right, Senator Mark, please have a seat. Members, please. We have had occasion in this chamber when the crosstalk has gone too far. Crosstalk is a feature of parliaments, but I am really going to have to step up on that now and ask members to please remain silent when members are speaking, because clearly we cannot, some of the things that I'm hearing, I don't want to hear. Senator Mark, please, I have cautioned you, and I ask you to heed that caution as you continue.
Yes, so Madam President, as I said, we beg to respectfully and humbly disagree with the learned and distinguished Chief Justice on this matter. In another incarnation, the distinguished Attorney General was in full support of the jury system, when now today he seems to be violently opposed. I want to quote for the record what the distinguished Attorney General said on Thursday, June 28, 2012, in the Trinidad Guardian. And I quote, Justice Minister Herbert Volney's proposal to abolish, that's when we had brought it. We had brought something to abolish trials by jury. True. Yes, but we pulled it back because when we went out there, the public said they're not in favor of it. So we had to withdraw it, Madam President. So when that was brought, Madam President, the PNM Senator Faris Alwari and Senior Counsel Israel Khan yesterday rejected the proposition, saying to do away with such a system would be to infringe on citizens' constitutional rights. That is what Faris Alwari, then Senator PNM, said on June the 20th, 2012, in the Trinidad Guardian. He went on further to say, Alwari, who also accused Volney of merely making a statement without making recommendation to improve the justice system, said, it is dangerous to offer that proposal in a mere vacuum. Care is required. He said a trial which included a jury, signaled a trial by one peers. But the difficulty in the criminal justice system was the bottlenecking when matters reached the High Court. So, in other words, Madam President, here it is, the former Attorney General, the former Senator, Faris Alwari, PNM Senator, now Attorney General, was advocating for the retention of jury by trial. Or trial by jury. But today, a different tune is being sung, Madam President, by the distinguished Attorney General. Madam President, I have evidence here today where even the distinguished Director of Public Prosecution, when that is Roger Gaspard, when he appeared before the Finance and Legal Affairs Committee back in 2016, 2017. It was on the 9th of November, 2016. And in this particular report, Madam President, on page 121, I want to quote what Mr. Gaspard said on record. Well, there has been some discussion about the doing away with the jury system. I know that is not a discussion that has been embarked upon by some members of the criminal bar. So discussions are taking place. I think more discussion needs to take place. Some people have the view that a large part of the delay, and that is what we have been told by the Honorable Attorney General and the Chief Justice, is because we have jury systems. I am not of that view, as a DPP. I am of the view that in this system there must be a certain degree of nexus and connectivity between the man in the street and the dispensing of justice. Yes. I am of the view, he goes on, Madam President, to state that a wholesale doing away of the jury system is tantamount to severing the umbilical cord or the umbilical between the man in the street and the dispensers of justice. I understand and I would agree that for complex fraud matters, you would need a certain type of juror, special juror. But I do not think in the normal matter, the average matter, the usual matter, you need to do away with the jury system. You also have to look at how that might be perceived. Madam President, it goes on. Many persons who go on to become judges may come from a particular background. Madam President, they may come from a particular type of school, whether you call them prestige schools or otherwise. And there might be the perception on the ground, that is the working man and woman, that the dispensers of justice are them, close quote, open quote, close quote, and they, same, and the people on the ground, that is, we. And that is not a perception that you might want to cultivate, end of quote. Madam President, this is what the Director of Public Prosecution said to a joint select committee that had brought him before them on the whole case management flow system in the criminal administration of justice process, Madam President. So you have a situation, Madam President, where that is being argued against completely, and where the DPP, the distinguished DPP, is calling for more discussions on this matter. The Attorney General has brought this bill. There has been no discussions with the population of this country, apart from a roundtable discussion that he told us about involving the judiciary. But the masses of people don't know anything about this particular bill that we are now debating. I go on further, Madam President. At a guest lecture at the Hugh Wooden Law School on March the 14th this year, Senior Counsel Israel Khan had this to say about the constitutional right to be tried by a judge and jury, Madam President. And I quote from page 12 of his lecture, Madam President. And he says, thus, it is of paramount importance to recognize and acknowledge that the supreme law of the land, the Constitution, enshrines the right of the individual to life, liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property, and the right not to be deprived hereof except by due process of law. It is my considered opinion that all criminal offenses which were triable before judge and jury before the commencement of the respective constitutions in the Commonwealth Caribbean remain intact. That is why I spoke about constitutional legitimate expectation via existing law. And I make this particular submission in spite of the legal authorities. And he quoted Hines versus the Queen and Stone versus the Queen. He goes on, thus I submit for your consideration that a legitimate expectation that a constitutional right exists to be tried by judge and jury for those serious criminal offenses which were triable in the Commonwealth Caribbean jurisdiction before the commencement of the various constitutions, and no law, including this one, may abrogate, abridge, or infringe that right unless Parliament, by a special constitutional majority, this is a simple majority, enact legislation which demonstrate it is reasonably justifiable in a society that has a proper respect for the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual. End of statement. Madam President, so we have distinguished Queen's Counsel, Senior Counsel, Israel Khan. You had Pamela Elder on record as saying she is not in support of this measure. And then, Madam President, I have also quoted for you other very important personalities on this matter. Madam President, where rights are being removed, as the present case, before this Honorable House, the government has an inescapable obligation, Madam President, to include and to attach a special certificate requiring a special constitutional majority. And this is not contained in the present legislation where rights are being taken away, Madam President. And therefore, we argue it is an affront to sections 4 and 5 of our Constitution and a subversion of the separation of powers principle, and as such unlawful, illegal, and unconstitutional, and therefore must be withdrawn by the Attorney General. That is our argument here this evening. Madam President, apart from not having any meaningful consultation with the national community on such a far-reaching measure with ominous implications and dangers for our citizens, human rights, and constitutionally enshrined freedoms, the government has introduced legislation, Madam President, which has run afoul of the High Court decisions of several provisions which were deemed unconstitutional and which are still in the legislation today. And they are seeking our support to give endorsement to what I would like to describe as bad law. And we will not do that, Madam President. We will not respond to that. Madam President, may I say, before I examine in some detail these offensive clauses in the current legislation, fully endorse the call by the President of the Criminal Bar for judges and magistrates to declare their assets, income, and liabilities to the Integrity Commission before any meaningful discussion could commence on trial by judge alone. That is a statement that has been made by Senior Counsel Pamela Elder, and I endorse it. No one is above scrutiny, and no one is above the law, Madam President. So, Madam President, I think I read somewhere where a UWI lecturer in law, Faculty of Law, Rosemary Bell Antwine, and was in the Express Saturday 2016, Madam President, where the lecturer is saying that judges, and I quote, judges make serious errors. The same judges that we are saying, Madam President, that we must now put the life of the citizens' hands in, we are being told by a senior lecturer and the Dean of the Faculty of Law in an article entitled, Better Justice with No Juries? Question mark. Judges make serious errors in dispensing justice, causing mistrials. They misdirect juries, intervene when they should not intervene. And therefore, the question is being asked, would a judge-based system mean better justice? Madam President, these are legitimate questions, Madam President, that are being raised. So when our colleagues on the other side said, the judges are the best thing after sliced bread, let us put all our hopes, or our dreams and our aspirations into the hands of one individual, and let that person determine life and death. Madam President, that is so preposterous, ludicrous, and offensive that no right-thinking, rational citizen will support such a provision. No one will support that in their right mind. Madam President, let me just journey along quickly. Madam President, we have heard, as I said, many submissions being articulated by colleagues here concerning this matter before us. And it is as if, Madam President, we are getting from our colleagues that there is, in fact, no attempt by the Attorney General and the government to remove a right that people currently enjoy. Madam President, if you can follow me, I will take you to the bill that is before us, and you will be able to see, Madam President, that when you look at, it is under, well, we are dealing with the amendment, as you know, Madam President, of both the Offences Against a Person Act, Chapter 1108, and the Criminal Procedure Act, Chapter 1202. Madam President, this Section 64 of this bill, if you go to Section 64 of the bill, Madam President, and you go to the Criminal Procedure Bill, Madam President, you will see where the government, in 64 of the Criminal Procedure Bill, the government is repealing, Madam President, deleting in some areas and repealing in others under 64. So if you go to, as I said, 64, by repealing Section 64 and substituting a new Section 64, which would provide for the procedure of a judge to take if an accused person appears on arraignment to be insane. So here what is being done here, Madam President, in this piece of legislation called the Criminal Procedure Act. The government is removing the following. The government is repealing the following. Where there is no trial jury, or where a jury have disagreed as to whether the woman is or is not pregnant, or have been discharged by the court without giving a verdict on that question, the jury shall be constituted as if to try whether or not she was fit to plead, and shall be sworn in such manner as the court may direct. It goes on in subsection 6 to say, Madam President, the question whether the woman is pregnant or not shall be determined by the jury on such evidence as may be laid before them, either on the part of the woman or on the part of the state. And the jury shall find that the woman is not pregnant unless it is proven affirmatively to their satisfaction that she is pregnant. Madam President, you know what the government is proposing to do? And I want to direct this to Senator Coppin and Senator Small and the Honorable Baptiste-Primus. What the government is seeking to do in this section, Madam President, is to provide for a procedure after repealing this section to have a judge, Madam President, a judge will be responsible for determining whether an accused person that appears before him is insane, as the case may be. So in the legislation, Madam President, we have a situation where you go to this section, page 7, I have the old one, where we talk about the pregnant woman. And it says, Madam President, in subsection 2, by deleting the word a jury, Madam President, and substituting the word a judge. So the government is removing the word judge and substituting it, removing the word a jury and putting in the word a judge, Madam President. And they go on further by repealing subsection 3, 4, and 5. And later on by repealing subsection 6. And they substituted with the following. The question whether the woman is pregnant or not shall be determined by a judge on written or oral evidence of at least 2 medical practitioners, and the burden of proof shall be on the person, Madam President, alleging pregnancy. And it goes on in subsection 7 by deleting the word jury fine and substituting the word judge finds. So, Madam President, what we are seeing is that the government has made an incursion into the right of citizens to a trial by their peers by removing jury in this act called the Criminal Procedure Act and replacing it by a judge and 2 medical practitioners who will now advise that judge. So no longer, Madam President, would the jury have the power to determine a person's pregnancy state. That is, and with medical support, of course. That is now being left to a judge to determine, Madam President. How can we support that? You are taking away, Madam President, a right that currently exists in the law of Trinidad and Tobago, a right that people are entitled to. And you are now replacing it with a judge, and you are telling me that we have options? There's no option here, Madam President. The government has repealed and they have replaced. That is what the government has done. And I was surprised that a lawyer, an attorney at law, Senator Coppin, did not see this. I'm surprised. I could understand the Honorable Senator Primus, Baptiste-Primus. She's not an attorney at law. And even my friend David Small, Senator David Small. But I cannot forgive a lawyer, Madam President, because this is clear. And I am wondering if there is an attempt to deceive, Madam President, to hoodwink, Madam President. I'm not saying anyone deceived, eh?
Please, you cannot put it the way you're putting it. All right? Find a different way to present that argument.
Where we are going, I will have to create a new English dictionary. Because it seems like anyway, I have another method of dealing with this matter. I want to tell you that. Yeah.
Senator Mark, please have a seat. I don't know what your method is. All I am saying to you is just respond to what I am asking you to do. Okay? Thank you.
Madam President, I would not engage you. Thank you. Yeah. I will leave that for another occasion.
Senator Mark.
So sorry, Mama. Sorry. Okay.
Senator Mark, I do not respond well to any sort of implicit sort of statements about. Okay, thank you.
I will hold my file. Madam President, may I continue, please, without any interruption, please? Please protect me from this lady. This lady is only disturbing me. That's all she does. Disturbs me.
Senator Mark, please, all members, you know better than that, Senator Mark, when referring to one of your colleagues, when you're referring to a colleague in this chamber. Okay? Continue, Senator Mark.
And you will protect me, please. Madam President, I'm saying, Madam President, yes, I am saying, Madam President, that the government requires a special majority to deal with this matter. Whether it is dealing with a pregnant lady or pregnant woman in the law that they have now changed from jury to judge, whether it is dealing with an insane person who has that right as we speak right now to enjoy that benefit of a jury, that is being removed by this government. We cannot support that. We cannot support that. How can we support that? Madam President, I want to tell you, revolutions have been created in countries when repressive governments seek to undermine and repress and overthrow and subvert the rights of the people. They rise up. They rise up against governments. And Madam President, I want to tell you in closing that for us, trial by jury, I want to tell you, for us in the alternative government, we are not easily given into threats by any prime minister or anybody. We stand firm and we do what we have to do. If we have to die, we stand firm. Madam President, let me indicate to you that for us in the United National Congress, trial by jury is a constitutional right. I want to put that on record. It is a constitutional right. Trial by jury, Madam President, is a part of our system that creates checks and balances. Madam President, outside of voting in this country, the only right that the ordinary people have in this country to participate in the system of democracy is through trials by jury, as jurors. That's the only other. This oppressive government wants to take that away.
Please have a seat. Your language. And I'm not going to ask you again. No, you have 3 minutes. Please use them wisely.
But if I consider this government to be oppressive, what do you want me to say?
All right. Senator Mark, take your seat.
Okay.
That's it. Senator Shrikissoon.
Thank you, Madam President, for recognizing me and allowing me to make an input into this debate at this critical time. Madam President, a lot has been said about this particular bill before us, and I would like to add my perspective. May not be grounded in that of a legal mind, but I appreciate the opportunity to present a perspective from a citizen's perspective looking in at the law that's being created. So I thank you for this. Madam President, the bill before us contains 5 clauses. Clause 1 of the bill provides for the title of the Act. Clause 2 provides for the commencement of the Act. Clause 3 amends the Section 1108 or Chapter 1108 and Clause 4 of the Criminal Procedure Act. What is very clear before me today, and there's Clause 5, which seeks to refer to the timing of the implementation of the Act. What is very clear to me, Madam President, coming out of this bill before us is that an option is being provided. So Clause 4 of the bill repeals Section 6 of the Criminal Procedure Act and introduces an option for the mode of trial. And I think that speaks volumes to me, as an option is being created. And if it is that I am to interpret the word option as exists before is not removed and still available as well. And therefore, my thinking is one of leaning towards an option, given that the accused has an additional option available to him or her. The new Section 1 introduced the option to be tried by a judge alone. And the bill also provides for, through Clause E of the bill, which refers to sentencing of an expectant mother, the introduction of evidence, whether written or oral, from a medical practitioner. So too, a similar right or similar right is given to someone who is being presented or is on arrangement, and therefore medical views are also being allowed or permissible to be able to pronounce objectively on the condition of the accused. And therefore, I would like to see, given the option that is being included, coupled with the medical evidence to support conditions such as to determine the person's capacity or wherewithal of his mind upon arrangement, as well as a mother's position, whether or not she's pregnant or not, upon sentencing. I would like to see those three things, in my mind, are strengths of this piece of legislation. Madam President, Clause 3A of the bill refers to Section 4 of the Offences Against a Person Act. Section 4 of the Offences Against a Person Act states, every person convicted of murder shall suffer death. And this clause here seeks to amend the law with respect to those who are accused of murder but can be convicted through a diminished responsibility. 4A is saying, when a person kills or is a party to a killing of another, he shall not be convicted of murder if he was suffering from such abnormality of mind. It is, 4A2 says it's the defense's responsibility to prove that point. And it says here, on a charge of murder, it shall be for the defense to prove that the person is charged by virtue of this section. But unlike where we had an issue of someone being presented or could be insane upon arrangement, or whether or not that mother is pregnant upon sentencing, in my mind, in this case, I'm not sure how a judge, without having that information, can pronounce on the mental health of someone in terms of reducing the conviction to a lesser responsibility, given that abnormality of mind is being presented for the offense as a condition of the accused when he was committed the offense. So I'm asking the question, how can a judge in trial by judge alone be sure that a person who is, or a verdict that is being pronounced because of a diminished responsibility, how can the judge be sure? That's what I'm asking. How can the judge alone be sure if it's being presented before a judge alone? Clause 3 of the bill makes an amendment to 4B of the Offences Against a Person Act, where murder was committed due to provocation. It says here, where on a charge of murder there is evidence on which a jury can find that person charged was provoked, whether by things done or by things said or by both together, to lose his self-control. The question whether provocation was enough to make a reasonable man do as he did shall be left to be determined by the jury. In this case of judge alone, provocation would have to be determined by a judge. Section 3C of the same Act concerns the administering of a dangerous substance. 3C of the bill refers to Section 17 and 9 to 19 of the Offences Against a Person Act and deals with murder that has occurred. 17 says, any person who unlawfully or and maliciously administers to or causes to be administered or taken by any other person any poison or other destructive or noxious thing so as to thereby endanger the life of that person is liable to imprisonment. So Section 17 is saying if a poisonous substance was administered and it endangered the life of the person, you have imprisonment. 18 is saying any person who unlawfully and maliciously administers to or causes to be administered to or taken by any other person or any poison or destructive or noxious thing with the intent to injure. With the intent to injure, aggrieve, or annoy, such person is liable to imprisonment for 5 years. So 19 is saying if there was injury or inflicted injury, there is a conviction. But if it is upon administering the substance, there is the intent to injure, then a lesser sentence is being provided. I'm saying all of this to say, Madam President, that when you consider these factors, which says, the first one saying that you have an incident or you have an accused being presented before a judge, and the judge has to make the case of whether or not that person suffers from abnormality of mind, the judge is placed in a position where he has to determine, and his interpretation is obviously subjective. My second point with respect to provocation, provocation speaks of the intent to do. And therefore, I'm also saying that requires some level of interpretation. And the final clause that I spoke of just before, which refers to the administering of a noxious substance or poisonous substance, is saying that if it was administered with the intent to. And I'm saying these 3 clauses, in my mind, there's an element of subjectivity where in a judge alone trial, the judge may have to make a decision. I am saying now, in the context of these subjective issues, whether or not an accused being presented before a judge alone, having evidence where there's an element of subjectivity, where someone's future is being decided upon the interpretation of results by a single person, really represents the best interest of justice. And therefore, Madam President, with respect to this, I am asked to look, or it required me to look at the flip side of trial by judge alone versus trial by jury. And in trial by judge alone, as I just said, or I just alluded to, that there's some areas of subjectivity that a judge will be confronted with and has to make a decision. How can the best interest of justice be administered there? But on the flip side, with respect to trial by jury, and we've heard in the House before through other senators in their contribution, we have the issue of pre-trial publicity affecting the selection of jurors. We may also have the situation of jury tampering, I think as Senator Small referred to. You may also have the situation where the evidence being presented in court is of a highly technical nature, and a jury, however it's composed, may not have the best knowledge to interpret technical data. And you also have a situation, in my mind, where the length of trials are so long that juries can actually become, or jurors, I should say, could become frustrated with respect to the process, especially having heard Senator Small's experience. So I am asking the question here, in a situation where trial by judge alone, there could be issues, or there could be issues being presented before the judge where he's required to make a decision that is most certainly subjective and based upon his interpretation with no hard empirical or scientific data, and compare that to a situation with trial by jury where you also have shortcomings and possibility, as I listed before, pre-trial publicity, length of trial, technicality of evidence, and length of trial times. So you have a decision where both situations, as Senator Small was saying, they both have advantages and disadvantages. Then how is the accused to make the best decision in light that both trial by judge and trial by jury can have both advantages and disadvantages to him or her? And that's the point that really confronts me in my mind. How can the best decision be made to offer the accused the best option available to him or her? And the law or the bill before us says in Clause 4, Chapter 6, Clause 4, Section 6 of the Act says, every person committed for trial shall be tried on indictment and subject to the provisions of this Act, shall be tried by a judge and jury unless he elects to be tried by a judge alone. And I am asking the question, given the accused would have the option, how can the best decision be made? The accused is looking at it, and I've heard from honorable senators who are in the field that sometimes the best legal advice may not be given to the accused at the time, given the person offering it. And I am asking the question today, in terms of affording the accused the best option, can there be a system where the accused outlines his rationale for opting for trial by judge alone, and probably the court, upon looking at the situation, rules as to whether or not trial by jury or trial by judge is befitting this circumstance? And so I'm asking, while he has the choice, he may not be fully aware, fully informed, and I'm just asking whether or not a process can be included so as the accused applies to the court outlining his or her reasons for opting for this or for choosing this option, and the court pronouncing given the facts and the evidence so far submitted on both sides. That's my request, whether or not it can be considered, rather than leaving the sole option to that of the accused. Can the institution responsible for justice evaluate it on a case-by-case basis and determine whether or not? I'm unsure. So I'm asking. The second point I want to raise, Madam President, concerns Section 6.3 and 6.4 of the bill with respect to time and choice. It has said here that once the accused elects to be tried by a judge alone, he or she is unable to change that plea. I'm unsure of the length of time it takes when a person is charged with an offense and the time taken for that person to appear before a judge. In Trinidad and Tobago, I'm so informed that on certain occasions that can have a significant time lag. And therefore, given the conditions of the court, and if that is true, then I'm asking, rather than saying, or rather in the clause, or rather than saying, or giving the accused the option, or having said to the accused, once you've chosen upon being charged, then you can't change again, can we consider allowing that person to still have the option and prescribe a deadline in terms of a certain number of days, whether 30, 60, or 90, I'm just using numbers here, before the commencement of the trial? That's my second point. Whether or not the accused can still exercise the option of trial by judge, or trial by judge and jury, up to whether 30 or 60 days before the date of trial, rather than making a decision upon being charged. That's my second point. The third point that I want to raise is more one of consistency in the legislation, and I'm unsure if I am interpreting the amendment correctly, and I'm guessing that the Honorable Attorney General or someone would help me here. Section 4G to K deals with the arrangement and trial of insane persons. 4H amends the Section 65 to allow for a person to be tried before a judge or judge and jury. 4I allows a section, 4I amends the subsection 66 to allow for a special verdict where the accused person is found guilty but insane before the judge or the jury. And they're saying here that a special verdict can be recorded against this person if they're tried before a judge or judge and jury. 4I amends section 66 to allow for a special verdict where the accused person is found guilty but insane before judge or judge and jury. 4J does the same, but 4K in section 68, and the amendment is by deleting the word jury and substituting the word judge. But section 68 says the court shall, as soon as practicable, report the finding of the jury, and we're changing that word to judge. I am asking if in the previous sections where we included judge and jury or judge, whether or not the change for 68 is consistent. Because if the finding in 67 of the judge or judge and jury should be reported, I'm thinking that in 68, the court shall, as soon as practicable, report the finding of the judge or judge and jury. I'm asking whether or not this is correct or whether or not my interpretation is wrong. Madam President, with respect to Clause 5 of the bill, Clause 5 of the bill speaks specifically to the implementation of this act upon its passing and does not affect prior cases. Madam President, in the Honorable Attorney General's opening remarks to this bill, he clearly indicated that there is a backlog. I'm unsure of whether or not this amendment can assist in that, given that it has to be applied from here going forward and not address the backlog. But I am still willing to say at this time that while I can't see it improving the efficiency of the court given the backlog, I'm still willing to say something different is worth a try. And whether or not this can effect change and have a positive impact into the future is to be determined, but I'm leaning towards at least those who occupy governance and in those offices having a full view or more information than myself. Recognizing this to be a possible option, I'm still saying that I'm willing to at least see whether or not it will bring about a difference. And in so doing, I'm asking whether or not into the future, a review of this law could be done to determine its impact, and then we'll be able to make an assessment of it. And finally, Madam President, as I come to the end of my contribution, there's a point that was raised, and I choose from my position not to engage in any political debates or points with respect to the party politics, but I would really like clarity on an issue that I think, if I lay it here, can be answered. Senator Ramdeen, in his contribution, Madam President, if you allow me to refer to the contributions in the House, referred to two clauses of the bill that he deemed, through a judgment of a court, that those clauses were unconstitutional. I'm unsure of the proceedings as to what occurs at a juncture like this. But those exact clauses that Senator Ramdeen presented are in the bill. And if you allow me, Madam President, to quote from an article, Saturday, March 18th, 2017, it says here, Ramdeen said a July 6th, 2009 ruling by Justice Gregory Smith in the matter of Evelyn versus the Attorney General deemed all of Section 4A and 7 of the bill invalid in relation to the Offences Against the Persons Act. He said Section 4A6 was declared unconstitutional, and the judge ordered that the Section 4A6 of the Offences Against the Person Act be modified. So Senator Ramdeen, in his presentation, alluded to two clauses that he deems unconstitutional, supported by a judgment of the court. In this same article, the Honorable Attorney General also rebutted, and he says these consequential amendments seek to merely include the word judge, wherever reference to the word jury is used in written and published laws of Trinidad and Tobago. So we're seeing that one contribution is saying unconstitutional, and another contribution is saying it's inconsequential. And I'm confused by that, because it's either, in my mind, constitutional or not. And that law is before us, and I'm unsure of, in passing the bill, included in it a clause that has the potential or has been ruled upon as unconstitutional, whether or not it sounds to be good law. I'm unsure. But in the same article, it says here, in a written report, the chairman of the Law Reform Commission, Lorraine Lachmedial, explained that the Offences Against the Person Act was last updated and published in 2011, and the Commission should have taken the opportunity to expunge the words from Section 4A6 and 4A7. I would like to take my leading from the Law Reform Commission, and saying that if the Commission has indicated that an element of the law needs to be changed, I'm not comfortable with the clause in its exact form forming part of a bill that is before us here, which requires my support. And so I'm asking, if it is, according to the chairman of the Law Review Commission, that if this clause, it needs to be amended, given that the clause is before us in this bill at this time, can we not make the necessary change to the law so as to reflect the judgment that was given concerning it, as well as include the amendment to make it applicable to this piece of law? And so I'm asking, because I feel a bit uncomfortable supporting a piece of legislation, which is my intent to do so, given the possibilities or advantages that it may bring, given that embedded in this piece of law, that there is a clause that was deemed unconstitutional and staying away from the party politics acknowledged by the Law Review Commission. And so I'm asking that this amendment be considered. Madam President, with those few words, thank you.
Senator Richards.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And thank you for the opportunity to rise and contribute to this. An act to amend the Offences Against the Persons Act, Chapter 1108, and the Criminal Procedure Act, Chapter 1202, and for related matters, and also, for clarity, miscellaneous provisions, trial by a judge alone bill 2017. It's been quite an interesting and protracted debate so far. And to be very honest, very compelling contributions have been made on both sides. Given what I've heard so far, in principle, I have to say, another option, if that is the case, is always a good direction in which to go, if it does not take away the initial premise. So, and in doing research for the contribution this afternoon, as a matter of fact, 3 weeks ago when the bill first was piloted by the Honorable AG, I looked at several jurisdictions like many of you, and one thing struck out in a couple of them, and I have a question for the Honorable AG, is that many of the jurisdictions started with jury and the judge systems. They went with an option at one stage, and then they moved totally to judge alone at another stage. And for clarity in my mind, I would like, and I'd gladly give way, is it the Honorable AG's vision that this be our path also, in terms of if this is established as a pilot sort of project, to one day remove the jury option and go totally to judge alone?
The purpose of this bill is only to allow an option where the accused himself agrees and consents to go for trial by judge only. In Trinidad and Tobago, we've had a lot of talk pro and con, but we have no data. And therefore, the exercise is intended to introduce a route, analyze the system, bring the evidence to the society after we have information, and then as a country make a decision. But right now, we just have anecdotal old talk and no hard data. This is intended to start that conversation.
Thank you, Honorable AG. With that said, I'm glad you brought up the issue of data and anecdotal data upon which to make decisions. You know, this debate in many jurisdictions has gone in so many different ways. You know, American writer, intellectual, humorist, entrepreneur, and publisher and lecturer Mark Twain said, and I quote, "Jury trials are the most ingenious, infallible agency for defeating justice that human wisdom could contrive." That's Mark Twain. On the other hand, we've heard several quotations from Lord Devlin that it's the lamp that shows that freedom lives. And the interesting thing about that, Devlin also observed that each jury is a little parliament. He added that the first object of any tyrant would be to make Parliament utterly subservient to his will, and next would be to overthrow or diminish trial by jury. So we have notable speakers on either side of this debate. And we've seen many countries that would have started with judge alone, in some cases, countries we consider dictatorial, moving towards what has been described as a democratization of jurisprudence, including South Korea, Mexico, and Japan. China has recently appointed 50,000 so-called people assessors, which we know as juries. And we all have a tendency to think China is more, in the past anyway, of a type of dictatorial society. For all but minor criminal offenses, Japan in May of 2009 moved in that direction also. South Korea in 2008 started to move toward a jury system. Russia in 2008 abolished jury trials for cases of treason and terrorism. So we see, you know, the pendulum swinging to and fro in many instances in many different jurisdictions. You know, one of my concerns about this, though in principle I agree with the option of jury trials, given the stated objective to deal with the backlog of cases and the delaying cases in our criminal justice system, one has to ask, you know, is this the real problem? Is the jury the main problem? What are the other issues here that we may not have looked at? And the Honorable Jennifer Baptiste-Primus indicated in her presentation earlier on that the data suggests that 15 to 20%, according to the CJ, the Honorable Chief Justice, in terms of the delays, can be attributed to jury issues. So if 15 to 20% of the issues is attributable to jury issues, what are the other 80%? What are the other elements that we may not or are not willing to look at in terms of what is causing? And while this is a noble attempt to add some movement forward, I think options need to be against a backdrop and a context of us being realistic, given the track record of the particular institution, the resources available, and looking at the actual problems or challenges. It's like, to give an analogy, Madam President, and again, I like the principle, but principles need to be based in context. It's like having a car with bad pistons, poor brakes, terrible tires, and thinking that, well, adding diesel instead of super will make a difference in the car's operation. We may not be looking at the real problem, or we may be adding a solution and not at the same time addressing the real issue. And that is part of my concern in this, because while I agree with the Honorable Attorney General that, well, another option and an assessment of that option down the road will give us more anecdotal data in terms of whether this adds relief to the situation we're trying to deal with. I am not sure that I'm seeing us looking at the 80%, according to Member Jennifer Baptiste-Primus, in terms of the issues that may be affecting the criminal justice system in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is where one of my big concerns lies. When we look at this debate, Madam President, you know, in the context of Trinidad and Tobago and the challenges that we're facing, we really need to have a clear idea of what we're facing and how to deal with it effectively. And we have had so many contributions in terms of, over the last couple of months, of many of the contributors, the possible contributors to challenges in the criminal justice systems and delays, from law enforcement, the penal system, the abhorrent criminal prison system in Trinidad and Tobago, the slow pace at which cases go through the courts in Trinidad and Tobago, the inhumane lengths of time and conditions under which prisoners are housed in Trinidad and Tobago, in contravention of basic human rights, in contravention of many of the UN conventions that we've signed, in contravention of any idea or concept of what should be a fair trial in any jurisdiction. And you have to ask yourself, when it comes down to it, is this option going to deal with all of those and holistically deal with the objective? It may add some relief, but if we don't address all the other elements in the criminal justice system, we may just be spinning top in mud, as we say. So what constitutes a fair system in any jurisdiction? Well, due process, impartiality, in a reasonable time, a case going through the system, and I think we can all agree that 8, 10, 12, and 15 years on remand, we've gone past any idea of a fair trial. And this judge-alone option will not deal with the cases that have already been, in anybody's reasonable estimation, gone past that person's right to a fair trial as is enshrined in our Constitution. And as a matter of fact, and I want to be very careful because I've heard Madam President's guidance to many other members before, if elements of our judiciary were a private sector company, we probably would have shut it down already, given its track record. When you think about it, the track record of that institution, which is a critical institution in this and any other country, is abhorrent at best. And we seem to be willing to settle one for what the status quo is there. So the 3,000 plus people on remand in X place and the 2,000 in the other place are just collateral damage. So what we do is forget them, pretend they don't exist, pretend we have not wronged them in our criminal justice system itself, and move and look to the future. That is not the way to solve the problem. We need to look at this holistically and try to deal with all the elements in an equitable manner so that we can have a holistic solution and a sustainable solution at that. Another element of any properly, efficiently running criminal justice system is the issue of justice for families of the victims and restorative justice and rehabilitation for the accused and those found culpable themselves. Because I will tell you, part of what I see the problem is that we have such a revolving door of criminality in Trinidad and Tobago that the same system is being burdened by possibly the same 5,000 to 7,000 people over and over and over, causing burden on the system and also costing taxpayers millions of dollars every year. I recently was made to understand it costs the prison system $1,000 per prisoner per day in Trinidad and Tobago. Does that make any sense? Someone stays on remand, and this is somebody who has not been found innocent or guilty, for 8, 10, and 15 years, in one case of somebody I've heard. How is this, and I keep saying, because I think it's a noble intention by the Honorable AG, going to help that person who has now lost 8, 10, or 15 years of his life in a system that seems shut? I don't think that's that's fair in any situation, and it certainly does not reflect what should be a civilized, progressive country. So we've heard so many contributions, Madam President, about what are the advantages of a jury trial, what are the advantages of a judge-alone trial, and yes, there are advantages and disadvantages to both of them. So I won't burden this Honourable House or yourself by going over all of those, but I came across an interesting article recently, and it spoke about a situation. So when we think, and we've heard quite a bit about disadvantages of jury trials and the shortcomings of them, but an interesting situation where, and it's listed in The Guardian, an American newspaper, Sunday, 18th October 2015, where corrupt justice, what happens when a judge's bias taints a case, and it tells the story of a divorced mother, Margaret Besson, and her 5-year struggle to get justice, and one story of hundreds of judicial transgressions across the U.S. revealed in this Guardian expose. And what happened in that situation, and this is just one case because, as I said, there are arguments for and against on both sides. And one of the outcomes of an investigation in that situation is said that, and I quote, judges in local, state, and federal courts across the country routinely hide their connections to litigants and their lawyers. These links can be social. There have been many law school classmates who share common friends, political, financial, or ideological in some instances, and the two may have mutual investment interest. And these should be taken into consideration when we're thinking, especially, they said, in smaller jurisdictions where everybody seems to know everybody, as we are in Trinidad and Tobago. So the argument in that case, Madam President, was that the situation where one is adjudged by a panel of 12 of one's peers, supposedly, is in that case, in their estimations, the more prudent way to go. One of the issues that Lord Delvin raised is that, you know, while some may assert that, well, the members of the jury are not intellectually equipped, which I don't agree, that's a broad generalized statement, or educated in law, it gives that person or those persons a chance to learn the law. It gives them a chance to understand at a cursory level anyway, because they're not going to be legally trained in a 3-month or a 2-month or a 2-week trial. Some aspects of what the law entails and what their responsibility as a citizen entails. It breeds a sense of commitment to country, it breeds a sense of responsibility, and to take it away or to add it to that sort of scenario in terms of a judge-alone system kind of confuses the element if we eventually go all judge. But the Honourable AG has debunked that, so I'm glad to hear that. Madam President, the situation to me, and I'm tending in the direction of supporting this amendment in terms of the judge-alone option. My concern with moving in that direction is that we use that as a possible panacea for what we're facing now. And I don't think that is going to work in any way, form, or fashion. I think we need to look at the holistic situation, particularly with reference to our prison systems that have now become universities of crime, bastions of inhumane treatment and uncivilized treatment of inmates, whether they be innocent or guilty, especially those on remand, and also subjecting our prisons officers to unhealthy, insecure situations because of the overcrowding situations. When you think of 8, 10, and 12 men from different criminal backgrounds or alleged criminal backgrounds being housed, some for 2 marijuana joints and 3 marijuana joints, and some murder accused, what you are doing is exacerbating the situation. And while we look at these options that is before us today, we need to place equal attention and fervor on that penal system in Trinidad and Tobago, which is abhorrent. I wish I could go into more details about a recent experience, but I can't right now because of the regulations that exist. But I will tell you, it is, when you read the Daniel Kahn report the Ramesh Desaran reports or any of the other reports into our prisons, it is one of the few times when you could be actually ashamed to be a national of a country because of the way those individuals are treated. And sometimes it's very easy for us to sit out here because we have not allegedly broken the law and cast judgment and say, well, you break the law, you do the time, and you face it. But in thousands of those cases, Madam President, thousands of them, they have not been adjudged innocent or guilty. And what is even more reprehensible to me, from my understanding of our criminal justice system, is that they are being housed in those subhuman conditions at the behest of the courts of Trinidad and Tobago. Something has to be wrong with that. And we need to pay particular attention to that. Fortunately, I will tell you, because so much has been said before, I can keep my contribution short. And while, as I said, I agree in principle with the idea of adding a judge option, I don't know that, given what we're presently seeing in Trinidad and Tobago, and again I'll be careful where this is concerned, that many persons in our population are going to have confidence in several aspects of our judiciary. And to me, that lies at the heart of anyone choosing to place themselves in the hands of a judge alone or being advised by their attorney or their lawyer to do so, given the controversies we're presently seeing play out in local media. I don't see that confidence in what is a critical institution in Trinidad and Tobago helping to imbue confidence of someone saying, well, that institution is being run properly, the principals are doing what they're supposed to do, and I'm hearing a kind of unfortunate chatter in society that, well, if they can't run their own business, how do they go run my business? Where that critical institution is concerned. And is the cornerstone of either the success or the failure of this noble intention by the Honorable Attorney General. And I'm not in any way laying this at the feet of the AG, because there's a separation of the executive and the judiciary in this country. But certainly, when we are proffering solutions, we need to take all the elements that will either add to success or failure into consideration. As I said before, you can't put diesel in a car with piston problems and hope it will fix the car. You have to look at all the problems with the car, and while diesel may work if you change the engine construction, you have to make sure you make the changes that are necessary to facilitate success in this regard. A judge alone option needs to stand on the foundation of confidence of the public in the judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago. If that confidence, it will end up, unfortunately, if it's not stymied, in the same situation that we have with the police service, where while there are primarily great police officers honest, a few bad apples has now led to a significant depreciation in confidence in the police service and cooperation. And we don't want that to spill over into a critical institution like the judiciary. I think that we need to be very careful with that in Trinidad and Tobago, because when you hear the talk shows and you sit and listen to people on the street, there are some institutions that are and should be considered almost sacrosanct in any country. And when those institutions start to, in a public manner, and critical elements and personnel in those start to be questioned, we have started down a slippery slope to anarchy. As an old saying goes, a slide down the hill to perdition begins with but one stupid stumble. And we can't afford these steps at this time. In terms of closing, because I don't intend to be long, because so much has been said already, Madam President, you know, one of the issues I have, and I'll be very firm about this, and I'm adamant that the jury system remain alongside any judge alone option in Trinidad and Tobago, because I think very often we all talk about the 5-year cycle in Trinidad and Tobago, where the population seems disconnected and dispassionate about being involved politically or otherwise. And that jury system is critical in maintaining that option for participation in what is a critical operation in our country. Madam President, democracy means, literally, the rule of commoners. In modern usage, is a system of government in which the citizens exercise power directly or elect representatives from among themselves to form a governing body such as a parliament. It is sometimes referred to as the rule of majority, originally conceived in classical Greece, where political representatives were chosen by a jury from amongst the male citizens, rich and poor. Unfortunately, no females were involved at that time. The English word dates back to the 16th century from the older Middle French and Middle Latin equivalents. According to political scientist Larry Diamond, democracy consists of 4 key elements: a political system for choosing and replacing governments through free and fair elections, the active participation of the people and citizens in politics and civic life, the protection of human rights for all citizens, and the rule of law in which the law and procedures apply equally to all and all have a chance to participate. And I think, and that is a definition of democracy. I think it is important for us to continue processes and institutions like juries, even if we are adding judge alone options in a bid to remedy a situation. But as indicated before, and I'm glad the Honorable AG chimed in earlier on in terms of explanation, we need to move more from subjective to empirical assessments of our operations and our ideas and our institutions and our initiatives. We can't just say, well, this administration did it, so let's all follow, and follow the unfortunate road of tribe division that we've seen in Trinidad and Tobago. It has to be done like any properly operating system, a system of careful thought, consideration of what's at stake, possible solutions, determination of the best way forward, and an assessment on a regular basis of what's working and what's not working, and not subjective interpretations of same. With that said, in principle, as I said before, I agree with the option of adding the judge alone, but I also am very adamant about maintaining public participation through a jury system. With those few words, Madam President, I thank you.
Senator Creese.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to begin by posing a question to the Attorney General, and I'm willing to give way on this because I am in two minds, to be quite frank, about the introduction of trial, the option for trial by judge. Would the Attorney General be amenable to having a sunset clause put on this so that we can review it at a fixed point in time and determine whether this is worth the trouble?
I'll do some consultations in the meanwhile. I don't have a policy prescription on that, but certainly as I come towards wrap-up, I'll be able to answer carefully.
Well, that would be it for me, Madam President. Thank you.
Senator Mahabir.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, this particular bill before us really is amending 2 pieces of legislation, the Offences Against the Person Act and the Criminal Procedures Act. And let me, before I move on to the substantive points I wish to make, commend the Honorable Attorney General with respect to the Criminal Procedure Act as amended. With respect to what exists on page 7 of the bill, Madam President, when we are dealing with the mental health issues of mothers and we are changing the crime from murder to infanticide. I think we are moving, Madam President, in a very progressive step to recognizing that mental health issues in any society ought to be brought to the fore and to be dealt with professionally. And I want to commend the Attorney General for that. Just yesterday, the Committee on Social Services that I chair, the report, of course, is pending, but we did, of course, investigate mental health issues. And we are learning a great deal now about the mental health status for our population. And also on that issue, on page 7 of the bill, for the consideration of the Attorney General, of course, when there is a review of the legislation, it says, if any accused person appears on arraignment to be insane, the judge, on written or oral evidence of at least 2 medical practitioners, may find whether such a person is or is not insane. I would have thought that you would want medical practitioners with specialization in mental illness, because its reading here is that any 2 medical practitioners can certify, and we are learning that mental health issues is a specialty, and you would want to tighten up the law to make sure that you have medical practitioners with specialization in the diagnosis, care, and treatment of mental illnesses. Those are just, Madam President, by the way, points. Madam President, I am having some difficulty with the trial by judge alone provision. And like my colleague Senator Choate, I reviewed the preamble to our Constitution. For nowhere was I able to discern that according to the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, an individual has a right to a jury trial. I wasn't able to see that. But when I examined the preamble to the Constitution, which gives us the spirit of the overarching law of Trinidad and Tobago, Senator Choate quoted from the preamble, whereas the people of Trinidad and Tobago, subsection C, which asserted that whereas the people of Trinidad and Tobago have asserted their belief in a democratic society in which all persons may play some part in the institutions of national life, and thus develop and maintain due respect for lawfully constituted authority, I thought was valuable in providing for us the spirit and the intent of the framers of the Constitution with respect to citizen participation in the national life of the country and the respect for lawfully constituted authority. But, Madam President, I want to refer to subsection B of our preamble, looking at the spirit of the Constitution, or at least my own interpretation of it. Whereas the people of Trinidad and Tobago, B, respect the principles of social justice, and therefore believe that the operation of the economic system should result in the material resources of the community being so distributed as to subserve the common good, and that there shall be adequate means of livelihood for all. When I read subsection B, which refers to our economic system, not our judicial system, but really our economic system, and our belief as a society that the operation of such system should result in the distribution of our resources so as to service the common good, I asked myself, when reading B and C together, whether the framers of the Constitution did not understand that while we believe in a fair and equitable distribution of income, we believe it, we know it will not happen. And since we know there will be inequity in the distribution of income, I see subsection C as coming in. Even so, individuals, despite their income status, should still play a critical role in the institution of national life. And I raised this problem, B and C, of our Constitution, Madam President, in the preamble, to focus on what I consider to be the spirit of how we administer and how we dispense justice. There are problems in my mind with this judge alone trial when I look at B and C, to which, when I'm coming to conclude, I will conclude with them. The first question I asked myself was this. I know it gives a choice, and choice is much to be expected and admired and welcomed in the economic sphere. Greater choice to the consumer gives him an opportunity to maximize the use of his income via something known as consumer surplus. But would greater choice in how one chooses or how one decides his mode of trial going to benefit the society as a whole? So I asked myself, who will choose a judge-alone trial as opposed to a jury trial? Madam President, a long time ago, when I was chairman of the Public Utilities Commission, appearing before me were some eminent counsels, one of whom was the now Attorney General, very early. And one of the senior counsels there drove home a point to me. I was chairman of a tribunal. And the point was, if your case is strong on the facts, pound away at the jury. If your case is strong on the law, pound away at the judge. And if your case is strong neither on the facts and on the law, pound away at the table. And what really it was mentioned to me was that when your case is strong on the law, and given my experience as a legislator, I have seen cases where there are going to be gaps in the law, gaps in how we write the law. I have seen gaps in we may inadvertently miss. And when the case is strong on that part of the exercise, the procedures which were involved in arresting a person or in taking evidence, when the case is strong on the law, you can refer that case to the judge. And you can indicate to the judge that there were breaches of the law. And the question is, who would normally request a trial via judge alone? And I think it is someone who could retain legal counsel, just as it was advanced prior, Madam President. Democracy is not cheap. Getting justice is also not cheap. It is costly. And anyone who could retain or who has the means, who is a winner in the economic system, who, according to subsection B of our Constitution, was able to garner, via the certain opportunities, skill sets that he has, a larger portion of the social pie, may be able to recruit the services of a senior counsel or a very competent attorney, and that competent attorney may then be able to argue his case via any infractions of the laws or interpretations of the laws which may occur. And this option is not available, Madam President, to the majority of people I saw last week on remand. And when I asked myself, who will opt for a judge-alone trial, I thought that this judge-alone trial would be very attractive to individuals with money. That's my problem. And if it is attractive to individuals with money, then it means that implicit in the bill before us is a system where the options available are options which are available to those who are the winners in the economic system, who will then also be the winners in the judicial system. And I think all should be equal when we are appearing before the courts. So this is a concern I have. And the problem, I conversed with the people on remand. It was a telling story on another occasion. But you see, our judicial system must not only be fair, it must appear to be fair. Our judicial system is the foundation of social stability. Every individual who thinks he is wronged or has been wronged, I hope in Trinidad and Tobago will feel that he will get a fair hearing regardless of his economic circumstance, regardless whether he was successful in B of our preamble or not. And I therefore have that concern that this judge-alone trial may be an avenue for wealthy people who commit crime to find a mechanism because they are able simply to pay for the legal talent which will allow them to exploit any loopholes in the law. And this, I think, is a matter that we have to have some concern with in a just and equitable society. But, Madam President, I have also concerns with a judge-alone trial with respect to the judge being in a position, the sole position, to determine guilt or innocence. The judge is in the best position to determine the law. He can read the Constitution, she can read the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, very well put together by the Ministry of Legal Affairs, and rule on that. But if someone were to appear on the witness stands, the judge, in my mind, given his range of experience, may not know whether to believe or not to believe that person. It is said some people can lie very well. I, unfortunately, am not one of those. But there are people, Madam President, whose veracity, to my mind, would best be determined by people who are similarly circumstanced like them, who would therefore be able to rule that I hear the story of this accused person, I don't believe it because I live under similar circumstances. I grew up similar to how that individual lived. And what he is telling me either accords or does not accord with my sense of what is happening in that society. So I think the judge is not really in the best position. Judges, as we know, are individuals society as they have to, but really, once you live apart, can you really understand the shenanigans which are going on the ground of the society? And I think really, I have some concerns, therefore, with the kinds of mindset of a judge, his cultural experience. It has been raised before, and how that may bring to bear on whether he is in the best position to believe whether someone is innocent or guilty. I make these comments, Madam President, having never really been in the courts for any matter, but I can just anticipate some of the issues. I have a problem with the judge-alone trial, Madam President, in that since the judge is now going to determine the sentence, the issue of the corruption of a judiciary has not arisen in any major way in Trinidad and Tobago, but I think the potential certainly will now exist. It's a position that Senator Mark alluded to, where the members of the judiciary, like members of parliament, will also have to reveal their assets to the Integrity Commission. But given that the judge is now the sole dispenser of justice, it does not have to go to a group of 12 individuals, there is a possibility of corrupting the judiciary. Wherever there is a supply and wherever there is a demand, a market will exist. And again, it comes down to who will be doing the corrupting. Individuals with means. And individuals with means, I think, will benefit tremendously from a judge-alone trial. There are cases in 2014 when we debated the bail amendment bill. It was raised, it's on the Hansard, by the then Attorney General that we needed to suspend the rights of certain prisoners for, I think, a period of 120 days because many of the individuals, if out on bail, do threaten judges. So that, whether it is so or not, I cannot say, but that was raised in defense of the bail amendment bill to have individuals incarcerated for up to 120 days. I recall I raised an issue, and that was the response to the issue I raised. Now, if it is possible to threaten judges who are simply going to adjudicate, I think a fortiori, it will be possible to threaten them more since they're also going to determine sentences. And I do not wish to corrupt the judiciary, and I do not wish to have our judges threatened by anyone. This judge-alone trial, this judge-alone issue, Madam President, is also of concern to me because it imposes upon the judges the need to write judgments, I'd imagine, on a timely basis. And we know the problems which exist with outstanding judgments. Every time I speak to people in the know, they always indicate that there are judges out there with outstanding judgments, and we are adding another burden to the judges so that this will be another part of the work that they have to do. Is this therefore going to impede justice, or will it frustrate justice? I cannot say, but really I think that we would be imposing an onerous task on judges. So if I were to just organize, Madam President, what my concerns are, imposition of written judgments will impose more time on judges, more time requirements on the bureaucratic administrative side. The potential for threatening judges where such threats do not now exist, and which we should not encourage. The corruption, the potential corruption of judges. The fact that judges may not be in the best position to determine innocent or guilt, but most important in my mind, it is the fact that we are providing potentially an avenue where judges may, in fact, Madam President, may I ask if we're going for the tea break? No. If we are we going for the tea break?
We are going to suspend at 1:30.
Very well, thank you very much, because I was going to run through. Okay. But so, Madam President, the concerns I have, therefore, is that we have some matters with a judge-alone trial. However, very well.
Honourable Senators, at this time, we will suspend and we will return. We will return at 5 p.m. Senator Mahabir, you have used up 17 minutes of your speaking time. So we are suspended until 5.